Well, look at there. Time to go live once again. I am delighted to be here. So many things are happening in the world today, and I want to talk about AI. It's been an interesting week, actually. Gemini's been all over the news, and I said a few weeks ago that Google was not asleep at the wheel and that they were actually making things happen. And I have to say, I've been really impressed with the work that they're turning out in terms of the quantity and the quality of what they're turning out. But we have to talk about this issue that's out in the open. Late last night, Google said, shut it down. And they turned off the ability for Google Gemini to generate images of people. And of course, that's the irony of the image that I've generated with ChatGPT here with the text, shut it down, because Google has in fact shut it down, and there's not a way to leverage Google Gemini or the model that's actually used to generate the images, ImageGen2, to generate images of people right now. We've been put on hold, and it's on hold right now because it's become a bit of a hot contested item. And so I want to take the time that we have today to kind of go through and talk about kind of what's been happening with this, because I really think that this is an opportunity for us to learn and understand AI mistakes. See, anytime a situation like this occurs, we need to take a step back and understand what's happened here, what can we learn, and maybe what's going to change going forward as a result of what's occurred here. But before we even talk about the controversy, I wanted to cover a little bit more about the image generation capability that we're talking about, because I think Google has a lot to be proud of in terms of what they've been able to do, both with the release of Gemini, the release of Gemini 1.5. If you've seen any of the headlines this week, you might have seen some of the developments around 1.5 and its large token basis. We'll cover that a little bit later in the discussion. Right now, I want to focus on the image generation capability. I really have found that this ability to create images from prompt with ImageGen2 is very impressive. Their model that is generating these images can do a lot, and this is a constantly changing environment. In fact, yesterday we saw the announcement that Stable Diffusion was releasing Stability was releasing Stable Diffusion version 3, and they're doing some really great things with that. We'll cover that in a later discussion because it's not available for me to play with just right now. But ImageGen2 is their latest text-to-image model, and it was developed by Google DeepMind. They've done some really fantastic work. It is a huge step beyond what they launched in 2022. And so I thought I'd take us through this a little bit and just talk about what they've done. Really, we're talking about the generation of high-quality photorealistic images from text prompts. And these are some great examples that they've provided on their website to share the story of ImageGen2. And one of the key capabilities that we're talking about with ImageGen2 is this ability to create faces, highly detailed faces. And they have built this to do the face rendering in a realistic way. And I think they've been largely very successful with it. In fact, that's sort of a part of the controversy here, because it is so good at what it does. It's really impressive. But then when you try to do something that you intend to do with it, you get a different result. And that sort of led us to where we are. But let's just take a quick look at the DeepMind site that they created about this ImageGen2 technology. I think it's a very good showcase of what they've done. When we look at the site here, we've got a number of images. They're showing us a showcase of some of the key data points that they want to show off. And these are very realistic images, and they include artistic as well as real life. It's also got the improved ability around image caption. So they've done a lot of work to better understand the user prompt and develop an image that goes along with that. So it's a dramatically improved output. And these are artistic renderings, but they're absolutely beautiful. I mean, this bird is tremendous. And when we start talking about the realism of the image generation, people are definitely a part of that. Understanding the styling that they've put together, there's so many elements to what gets plugged into the model and what comes out of it. These are enormously complicated models that are able to not only understand what it is that we want, but create a contextual visual experience that is cohesive and really logical. Now, I've spent a lot of time playing with these tools. I'm not an artistic expert, but I am very impressed with the overall composition that's coming out of these models. When I play with tools like DALL-E 3, sometimes it gets to feel a little bit busy, and I don't feel that about what we're seeing with what Google has put out in ImageGen2. Now, I do want to call out that Google is very much focused on this issue of responsibility in terms of the design and what the model will output. And I think that this is really becoming a central part of the discussion that's ongoing right now around the controversy with what's been happening with the generated imagery. And I don't think that I can really go too far in explaining that this is something that's going to get increasing attention because we need to talk about what went wrong. Now, the news has been very clear that essentially what's happened, it has been shared in social media by Google. They have plainly stated that the AI images are restricted because of the discussions that are happening on social media. There has been a lot of controversy here. And I will say that once again, I've been really impressed with what I've learned through my feed on Twitter. Really being plugged into what's going on has been a key value for me in understanding what's happening. And so rather than try to really cover that in greater detail, I thought what we do is just jump into the feed of what's been happening, because as these things have been happening, I've had the opportunity to sort of record through my bookmarks and flagging things to talk about this from what I'm seeing in my feed and what's coming out. And this is really a great way that you can see a lot in a short period of time and really get a better understanding of the situation. Now, here's a great example of what's been happening. Now, there is a lot of controversy, and some systems like DALL-E will oftentimes simply refuse to deal with the image generation of a person whatsoever. So I will say that Google has done a good job of not putting a ton of restrictions and having the model respond to you that it can't do something. And full transparency, I've been following Jack, and I'm not going to bother to pronounce his name because I'm sure it's Polish, and I'm not going to do that very well. But I've been following Jack now for several weeks post the launch of Gemini, because he's been sharing with the community kind of what's been happening from a product development standpoint. And I have to say that I've been very impressed with the feedback and the openness and the invitation for how can we make our product better. So I really feel like they are connected to the larger AI community and understanding that they're not going to get it right, and that there are mistakes in releasing these models, and that again, the news around what's been happening here was communicated by Jack on Twitter. And he basically said, look, we understand that there's some things here that aren't quite right. We're acknowledging that, and we are working to actually address that, and specifically called out the historical context that's involved with that. But if you look through some of the images that are cataloged here on social media, because we can't go out and try it out right now because they turned it off, here are some examples of some of the things that are coming across. And essentially the overall theme here is that there seems to be a bit of a mismatch between what the user expectations are in terms of the generated imagery and what's actually coming out of it. Now, again, there is a lot of controversy here, but I want to make sure that we're talking about this from an overall perspective, because while some are saying that it doesn't do imagery of a certain race at all, that's actually untrue. It is possible to get that to happen. I think really the conflict is over how difficult it is to make it do what you want, and the fact that it is doing it to images that some users really feel is inappropriate. Now, I really do believe that we can have it both ways. We can address the diversity problems, and we can work on generating imagery that's accurate and valuable and useful to the user population. So I do think that we're really largely talking about a temporary issue. I'm not sure that I really agree with the idea of, hey, let's just take it offline, let's take it away and work on it. Because at this point, the cat is out of the bag. What's happened has happened, and we need to be understanding that, look, there is work in process. None of these things are going to be perfect, but also I think there should be an acknowledgement of really the bigness of the problem that we're contending with here. No matter what we choose, there is, in my opinion, bias involved. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I see the world as there is bias no matter what you do. That is going to be a part of your decision matrix. And we need to be very intentional about disclosing exactly what the bias is, what our goals are in terms of what it's going to do, and be very clear about that. Now, as you see these images fly by on the screen, I want you to notice that many of the prompts are pretty straightforward. And when we talk about getting these images, what we're seeing is a very basic and simple prompt is presented. And then the model is responding to that using the inputs and the guidances that are given to it. So I think there is some amount of criticism that's perhaps a little unjustified, because when we look at what it's putting out, I mean, the results are really amazing. I mean, it's hard to deny the quality that is coming out of these images. And really, the controversy is the fact that when they want it to produce the image of a white person, it's just not doing it. And I think that that is something that we need to take a step back and say, how can we make this better? Now, we don't have all of the details behind the decisions that were made and the guidances of the overall model, the controls from a system prompt perspective, from a capability and training perspective. So I wanted to do a quick rundown. I just threw some bullet points on the page for us to have a conversation, because there are probably several, as in more than one, mechanisms that are in play in terms of how the system is actually doing this. And that might also play a role in the decision to take down the access to the image generation in its entirety. Some of these methods are definitely more involved than others. And it's very likely that part of the remediation process here is that Google wants to have an opportunity to reset and retest and redeploy. And they're a little reticent about doing that in production. I find that a little bit ironic, because you see all of the amazing things that Google has done over their history. I was a very early Gmail user, and when they released Gmail to the world, it was very plainly released as a beta, which in my view is a way for Google to clearly acknowledge, look, we know that this isn't going to be perfect. We want you to know that, but we also don't want to deprive the world of this kind of capability. So I do think that there is ample opportunity for Google to relaunch and improve what they've done. Look, they've made a decision. They've taken an action. And I think anytime an organization takes an action, that is to be lauded as, hey, they are responding to what's happening in the space. I think it's unfortunate that we had to go down this pathway and deal with this, but let's dig into exactly the different methods that might have been used here to make the model have the behavior that it does. The first of these is the training set data. And we know from conversations that there's a lot of talent at Google that have been very focused on this problem of racial and gender stereotype. They are very likely helping to control that issue, not only by the information that they are instructing into the model, but the data sets that they are using to inform it. And that could be a major factor if they are trying to counteract a prevailing stereotype across the board. One way that you could do that is to only give the data to the model that reverses those stereotypes and tendencies. So it could be a byproduct of the training model data that they've given. And when we talk about image generation, of course, that is a very different body, a very different corpus of information than you might have from a typical large language model corpus. There's all sorts of training and data sets that many organizations are using. One of the advantages that Google has from an AI perspective is that they are the world's search engine. They have access to a lot of information and data sets that other organizations do not. So I do have to say that if it is a model training defect, that has to be an artifact of intentional selection and bias in choosing the data that's going to be informed, because I would fully expect that Google has more data access across the world than virtually any organization. And I will tell you, my introduction to artificial intelligence was way back in my college days. And as a part of one of the courses I took on emerging technologies, I found out about a book by Ray Kurzweil that was called The Singularity is Near. Now, it's a very dense book, and I was able to get through it using my Audible subscription. So listening to a book like that was how I was able to fully get through it. But it really ignited my curiosity for AI. And a few years later, I found out that Ray Kurzweil went to work at Google. And some of the speculation around his having moved to Google was directly tied to the fact that Google has so much of the world's data. If you are training AI models, Google really is a great place to be because of those data sets. So model training could absolutely be a part of the issue. And the quote from the article I was reading about this basically said that image generators can amplify racial and gender stereotypes found in their training data. So when we talk about this, this is basically an observation that if you just give it the data that's available, you're going to get a gender stereotype out of it simply as a byproduct of the data that is used to train the model. So it makes sense that it could simply be a model training issue, but sometimes when we talk about fixing things, humans are not very good at doing things right in the middle. We're very good at the pendulum swing, going from one end of the spectrum to the other, and that could very well be a logical explanation of what's happened here. But we've seen from the prompt releases that have come out with OpenAI, I have now seen both the DALL-E prompts and the ChatGPT prompts. There's some really interesting outcomes and details that are being shared in the prompt, the system prompts. That is that set of prompts that are used to guide the engines on how they are going to respond. And it's uneditable by the user. So as a primary example, in ChatGPT, what came out in the revelation of the system prompt was that if you ask it to do a summary, it will have to do that in 80 characters. And so they put a hard limit on some things. So it is important to understand what is in that system prompt, because really that is the set of constraints that you and I are put under in using those tools. I really feel like that there is a level of need for specification, because look, as an architect and engineer, we're always trying to understand what are the boundaries that we need to operate in. What can we expect? What can it really do? And then what are the limitations in terms of best practices and the way that it should function? And I think when we talk about post-training modifications like prompts and system controls and prioritization, that's an important detail that is very clearly being controlled by those providing the model. And I don't see a lot of harm in disclosing that level of detail. Now, I do think I kind of have an open source philosophy on this. When we've talked about GPTs in the past, OpenAI provided this ability for anyone to go and build their own custom GPT. And that is largely affected by the use of prompts. And some people are very concerned about having their prompts leaked or exposed. Of course, as we talked about it, we also understand that it's very difficult to protect that to a large degree. And we've seen it again and again by the leaking of these system prompts. People have found ways to manipulate and persuade the model to give away all of its secrets. And that is happening across the board with both of OpenAI's capabilities And when we look at services that are providing large language model capabilities, I don't think that that problem is going to go away overnight. I talked about this previously in a discussion on prompt injection, which we'll cover again here later on the channel. But this is definitely a place that there could be modifications that are necessary. The real advantage to using a prompt modification methodology using a system prompt is that it's very quick to iterate and change that. So I'm a bit suspicious that since the service has been turned off, I don't think that we're talking about a simple post-training modification that's going to quickly be reversed and altered to change the outcomes that we're getting. Which brings us to the next point. When we talk about artificial intelligence capabilities, there's a lot of math that's going on behind the scenes. And I don't want to get into the complication of all of the math. But when we talk about building models that are used for artificial intelligence, one of the things that happens is a lot of statistics and mathematical fitting of data points. When we talk about the use of large language models, what's actually happening behind the scenes is the set of words are being interpolated as tokens. And a token is what we've come to understand in terms of how much you can load into the model, how much you can have it work against. And what is happening behind the scenes is those words, those set of values, are ultimately being converted into a numeric value that is then fed in as a parameter. When we talk about the size of the models and billions of parameters, that's really what's happening behind the scenes. It's all being put into a set of numbers, and then that model is leveraging that data to identify what is associated. It's using that to understand context and really bring together that set of information. And so when we talk about overcorrection of bias, there is an inculcation that what we're talking about is an overfit of the model. In other words, we're trying to adjust things to fit what it is that we believe is correct. And there are mathematical ways to do that in the model and in the evaluation of those. So that could be another place where this model decision point is being taken. And then the last bullet, and this was talked about again as a specific excerpt from the article I was reading. Over time, the model is being informed. None of these models today are static. And especially when we talk about what Google has most recently released with their Gemini model, and it would appear this is also true with their ImageGen2, it is constantly learning. It is constantly taking in the information and learning from how it is being used to improve. And so it is entirely possible that as people are manipulating the model and informing it, you have the ability to provide feedback on the models. It's one of my more favorite elements to both what I've seen with ChatGPT and with Google, because you're able to say, look, this gave me an answer that didn't make any sense, so that they can act on that and use that as a part of their data sampling to improve the model over time. And so the statement here is, over time, the model became way more cautious than we intended and refused to answer certain prompts entirely, wrongly interpreting them as sensitive. So this, again, is indicative that it's a larger problem. It's going to take a little bit more time for Google to disentangle. But I think this is really interesting for us to learn from. This is such a great opportunity for us to get behind what's been happening and understand not only what is being done to manage this as a service, as an application, but what we can learn about AI and how it works behind the scenes. And as we talked about a few minutes ago, Jack did provide, look, we know this isn't doing what we want. We are going to further tune to accommodate that. So the action that they're going to take to improve the outcome does touch the model. We don't have any idea how long it's going to take for that to happen. But let's talk about some other issues that relate to the actions that have been taken here. I think this isn't a new problem, okay? We've talked about this concept of we don't really understand what the AI is doing. There was a great TED Talk that I had an opportunity to watch a number of years ago. Yes, it was that long ago, where they talked about the model understanding pictures of dogs. And as they were interrogating what the model understood, what they discovered is that the model was actually focusing on a cluster of pixels that were in the corner that had nothing to do with the image of a dog. And so the model actually extrapolated a set of information that was very different from what we had intended it to do. And the lesson taken away from that situation is that we need to understand a lot more about how the model is doing what it's doing. Now, I think that that situation has improved with the mathematical models and the more recent large language models that you and I have had an opportunity to play with. But when we talk about AI and how it's coming to the conclusion of what it has done, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of continuing to drive the transparency there. I'm a big fan of Perplexity because it allows me to inject the search results into the answer and understand where that tidbit of information came from. One of the more common solutions that we've seen made available to us is retrieval augmented generation. And I got really excited when GPT for All released their local docs plugin, because that was an implementation of retrieval augmented generation that allowed you to give it files, ask it a question, and it would pull verbatim from those files direct quotes that were connected to what you were asking it. So you were able to, with that capability, understand not just the answer, but collect an answer that was verifiable and sourceable. When we talk about the progress that we're making as humans, so much of the conversation is what we say, but it needs to be backed up with more information. We say, what are your sources? Where did that come from? Because we need to verify where the information is coming from. And some of these large language models have obfuscated some of those details. Now, the world continues to improve and get better. The results I'm getting out of ChatGPT when it is doing a search related query is giving much better source information. We're seeing less and less artifacts with that. I will say that probably the worst offender of this today is the model Grok that is available on Twitter, or X if you prefer. Oftentimes asking it to give you links to things, it completely makes up the URLs. It gives you real tweets and you can dive into those and look into those details more deeply. It's done a good job with that. But if you want a URL, almost every URL I have received from Grok has been completely made up. And so it's not enough to have a source. You actually have to check them. And this is where you and I really come into that understanding that it is our primary responsibility to make sure that the data that we're using out of these models is verifiable and that it is reliable and that it's coming from a place that we can trust. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that going forward. And what I'm excited about with some of the things that have happened over the last week is people are getting access to the Gemini 1.5 model that lets you do 1 million plus tokens. And what they're discovering is that they can plug in documents and books and information to take advantage of those tokens. And it is returning 100% correct information as a part of the token context. So we're getting to a point where I think we're going to solve this trust problem with the large language models, and we'll be able to really rely on the information that they're giving us. But there's still a lot of opportunity in the space. Lots of algorithms and decision making are happening behind the system, and we really need some better transparency. And one of the social media folks that I follow in the AI space, Brian Romelli, has really called people out. He said, look, I think we need to be disclosing this information. I think it needs to be a part of the official record, and we should do it voluntarily because this is going to become a legal entanglement. I think at some point it is going to become a legal requirement that we understand the kinds of prompts that are behind this. If it's a training model problem, that's going to be a little bit harder to clarify from a legal perspective. But we've already seen some things in that space. And that's where I want to talk about now, where we are with regulations and governance. You all may or may not be aware that the White House actually created an executive order to ensure trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. And part of what they've proposed is sort of an auditable model where the model data sets are monitored and understood. There's some sort of a legal approval process that's been made a part of these large language models that are being released. And I have a set of opinions about this. I don't think that this is the best way to go about doing it. I do acknowledge that regulations and governance and controls are important. In fact, any process that I've ever been a part of as an IT professional has included some element of regulations, governance, or controls. It's what's necessary for us to have a comprehensive and reliable process. And I just think that the way that we go about this, we can overcomplicate it from a bureaucratic standpoint. And there are ways that we can do this in a more public and disclosable manner. I'm also a really major advocate of open source development of artificial intelligence because I think it also democratizes the technology and what we're able to do with it. So I think that as we're developing these, we're going to have to find better ways to inform everyone of the kinds of data sets that are going into these tools, the system prompts that are being used. And, one of the benefits I had in my early entrepreneurial career was I developed websites and content management solutions in the very early days of the internet. And one of the major benefits that I experienced through that was websites, particularly HTML, cascading style sheets, and JavaScript were almost exclusively open for me to learn about and explore. So when I saw a cool website that was doing something that was impressive to me, I could right click and view the source code. I was able to learn directly from the people that built that site. And that was part of the underlying architecture. There was no compiled assembly binary that could obfuscate or otherwise keep you from learning about the logic that was behind things. Now, that wasn't the case across the board. We had even active server pages. That was the era I was in. You could put the code into the server and it would run server side and spit out the HTML. So you weren't able to see everything behind a website and the way that it was doing work. But if it was a front end presentation layer technology, you could see what was the code being used to execute that graphical user interface. What were the style sheets that were used to make it look pretty or to load quickly? And I think there's a lot of value to being open and disclosing these details, because the reality is hiding it, we have learned, really doesn't lead to a better outcome for anyone. And there's a lot of folks that are concerned about other people having access to the technology that we don't want to have access because we want to control it. But there is an element to that's not the best solution to the problem. Hiding it is not going to keep it from being discovered or used. And that brings us to this idea of deeper understanding how we build things, how we can help each other and make things better. I think the real takeaway is that we have lots of opportunities to improve upon what we're doing with each other. And one of the organizations that's trying to make that happen is OWASP. They this week released their version 1 of the LLM AI cybersecurity and governance checklist. Basically, they are providing a top 10 list, a checklist that lets you think through how you are releasing your large language model, how you are ensuring the cyber security of that environment and the governance of it, because these things are important and we have a lot to learn from them. So go out there and see if you can find the guide if you're having difficulty finding it. I did share it on my LinkedIn profile. There's some really great things that are coming out now, and the cybersecurity community is really trying to derive some real value and bring the kind of information that we need to make things happen well. And I too am trying to contribute to this body of knowledge. It's part of the reason I started AI Mistakes, because we need to learn from our mistakes. If you're going to innovate, look, you're not going to get it right out of the gate. And there has to be an acknowledgement of that. And so if you're interested in learning more, the mistakes framework is available on my website at ai-mistakes.com. It is an innovation model that helps us move through each phase of the innovation process, acknowledging that we need to make mistakes, but that we can also do it in a way that we can learn from, that is safe and constructive. It is absolutely possible for things to be released too soon or for us to skip over the necessary controls and protections that allow us to run experiments without creating a bad experience, a negative user interaction, or even larger disasters. In the engineering space, there's redundancy, and organizations are using various ways to protect by making redundant build outs of various capabilities. And I think that that too is a part of the discussion that we have to have. Google pulled the model back because they needed to work on it. There was no redundancy in the implementation. And look, this is all experimental. We're in an entirely new world today. And I think there are rights and wrongs. I want to say, I really think Google did the right thing by reacting to the controversy and trying to take steps to improve. This isn't the last that we're going to see in this kind of controversy. It's going to continue happening. There are lots of things in the AI space that we know are not right. And part of what I'm trying to share with the community here is those places where things are going wrong and we could do better. So let's explore that together. Let's find ways to learn and grow. What are the AI mistakes that you're seeing out there? And what can we learn? What can we share with each other to improve what we're doing and make the AI implementation better, to make ourselves better, learn and grow and make the world a better place? That's why we're here at AI Mistakes. And so with that, I've shared what I want to talk about, but I do want to come back to the issue of Google Gemini real quick before we close out our time. The discoveries and developments that we've seen with Gemini have been absolutely mind-blowing around the token capabilities. And if I can find my window here with Twitter, one of the folks that I follow and see some really great things from is McKay Wrigley. And let me put this back up on the screen so you can see it. McKay's been doing a lot of development work with Gemini, and he's one of a few social media folks that have shared some really amazing results. He put out this video, and I'm gonna blow this up and make it full screen if I can so you can see it. But one of the experiments that McKay did was to actually record a video of his desktop, and using what came out of that recording, he was able to take that recording and drop it into Google Gemini. And loading that video into Gemini, it even tells you how many tokens it consumed loading that video. If you look, you see here he's got 41,000 tokens that the 2-minute and 38-second screen recording took. And then he was able to give it some instructions on what to do with that. And lo and behold, it did it. And I think that that is really incredibly impressive, combining multimodal capabilities, video and text and imagery, to come out with a result. So basically what he's asked the model to do is create a breakdown of the NVIDIA earnings, and then using the web browsing session that has those details embedded in the video to come up with those answers. So he's not feeding in the web page, he's feeding in the screen recording of all of the information aggregation. And then it is taking that information into the model. It's understanding the information that it's being handed. And we'll give it just a moment here. It's not, I mean, this is incredibly fast considering the amount of information that we're talking about. So look, the fact that it takes a minute, really, that's immaterial. The access level here, you can see he has access to over 1 million tokens. I'm sure there's some sort of a binary output number there with the 1 million tokens. But if we fast forward here, just for the sake of argument, it does spit out the answer. We get a verifiable chat response that covers quotations, numbers, and provides the detail that he was asking for it to put out. This kind of capability is mind-boggling to me. It is able to do this at a level of intelligence that is incredibly impressive. And this is just the beginning of what we're able to get access to. It is really amazing. And that's not all. There's more. I mean, he did some other experiments, dropping a code base into Gemini and asking it to actually do some development, some complex code work. And it was able to do a significant portion of that. And then some other folks that I follow were able to plug in some very complicated stories. Ethan was taking this work of his that was collected, and he gave it basically the entire collection, 20 papers and books that is his academic work. And he was able to ask it some very detailed questions, and it was able to pull quotations. It was able to quote things and give correct answers based on all of this data being loaded in. Now, again, Ethan said it wasn't 100%, but it was more right than it was wrong. And I think that this is something that is definitely worth paying closer attention to, because the capabilities that Google is plugging in, number one, they're making it available for us to play with. Now, I'm not the mega influencer in the AI space, so I don't have access to this yet. But the fact that anyone outside of Google has access to the model and can do these experiments and discover right information is absolutely incredible. I think it's fair to say that Google is really pressing their advantage of taking external information and making it accessible to the model so that you can do really complex things with the model and get verifiable, reliable answers from the model. There's so much happening in this space. If you see something that you think is really exciting, I'd love to hear from you. In fact, one of the things that I most enjoy is the opportunity to interact with you on social media. So don't be shy, say hi. If you're enjoying the videos that I'm putting here, let me hear from you. If there's something you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear about that as well. Please like my content if you are enjoying it, and across all of the social media channels. I wish you the best weekend. Enjoy yourself and go make some AI mistakes. We'll see you next time.